Hi, I'm your host, Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. Okay, so we're joined here today by Kevin Liebe. Kevin, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for having me. This is my first time ever on a podcast, so appreciate the invitation. For those that don't know me, I am the president and CEO of Hearing Health and Technology Matters. It's a fairly well-read blog in the hearing and audiology industry. Get about 1.5 million views per year. But I am an audiologist. I've been practicing audiology for about 11 years. Spent most of that time in private practice, but I've also spent 4 or 5 years in the industry side of things as a trainer, technology support. Kind of a fairly well-rounded, kind of been experienced on a lot of different sides of things. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. And, for those listening, I've known Kevin for a little while now. Hearing Health and Technology That Matters. This is a pretty widely read publication, like he said. And I was really looking forward to bringing him on because, as somebody that's on the media side of the audiology industry, he's obviously reading the news all the time and he's very in the know. And there's just so much that's happening right now within this industry. It's funny. It's like, I think if you look back like 10 years ago, it was kind of a sleepy industry that not a lot of mainstream tech was like really starting to become pervasive. And
Definitely not.
as like Bluetooth, the advent of Bluetooth and rechargeability, I think that we're seeing just a lot of focus, from a lot of different provider, from a lot of different players out there. And so I've been wanting to have this conversation with Kevin to discuss, just like a whole lot of different topics that are sort of pertaining to the change in the audiology world right now. So let's start with this new column that you've started. I think it's a really interesting column that really highlights technology and the prominent role that it's like increasingly playing. So can you speak a little bit about that column and where it's going?
Yeah. Yeah. So this new column, this in our industry, I mean, unlike the tech world, that disruption is such a kind of a cliche thing. We're always talking about everything's disruption, but really in audiology and the broader hearing industry, disruptions become it has become more and more common the last several years as hearables have come onto the scene, connectivity, like I said, Bluetooth, all these technologies that are increasingly becoming available in hearing aids and other hearing assistive devices. And so, but that's not really the whole picture, of disruption. I mean, so with audiology specifically, I mean, there's obviously you have the regulation change with OTC hearing aid rules coming out, but there's been a lot of other things, and I kind of wanted in this column to, over the course of it, the next several months to year, we really want to look at like lots of different parts of things that are affecting the hearing industry. So whether it's, like I said, regulation changes, whether it's technology changes in hearing aids, AI, machine learning, or the other component that doesn't get as much attention, and that's the pharmaceutical and biotech industries and how they're starting to impact our field. There's just a lot of forces at work from a lot of different angles, and only a few of them get most of the airtime, so to speak, or visibility. So I really kind of wanted to bring a kind of a holistic picture of like, hey, it's not just OTC hearing aids. I mean, there's a lot of different things happening that maybe are a little bit scary, but in a lot of ways there's so much opportunity and some really awesome things happening that's going to benefit not only professionals, but our patients and people with hearing loss. So it's just something that I've been wanting to do for a while, and we've touched on different parts over the years, but this is kind of a column I really wanted to focus and kind of drill down on these different factors.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, have you put out 3 so far?
Yeah, we've had three so far, and we've already got two or three kind of in the works right now, but they'll be publishing over the next few months.
So to give the listeners a little bit of a preview, let's go one by one on the three that you've done. So the first one
Okay.
was Brandon Sawalich, the Starkey CEO, correct? What was that one
Yes.
entailing?
Yeah. So Brandon, a lot of it was he was kind of he actually well he actually had volunteered to be my first interview. He's really nice gesture. I had just told him as an aside when we were talking about something else. He just was like, I said, "Hey, I think I'm going to start this column up where I'm looking at these different disruptions." And and he said, "Hey, yeah, I'll be your first one." So I said, "Okay." So I took him up on the offer, and he basically he's kind of touched on a lot of things, but OTC was a big thing, and he kind of was giving some advice for people in private practice and sort of talking about some of the trends and things that we're seeing. But a lot of it was, which I think more and more people are coming to this realization that OTC is not as scary as it was a few years ago to the professional side, and that really it's just going to be a great opportunity because we know it's not going to solve the hearing, like the overall hearing picture for people that have hearing loss. It might be a good device that will get people kind of that are nervous about going in to get tested or whatever. But a lot of ways it's just the same way reading glasses are. Just because people get
Mhm.
reading glasses doesn't mean they're not going to go get professional, go in and get tested and things. And so I think Brandon, he addressed a lot of those concerns in that interview, and kind of where he sees it and then the way he thinks professionals should handle it. And then just a couple other things. I mean, there'd been a rumor a few years ago saying, "Hey, is Starkey going to sell?" And that was like one of the questions that we'd asked as well. I mean, just as something like, "Hey, there's these rumors going on. I haven't heard too much lately," but he just said, "Hey, we're not going to sell our baby. This is, kind of put those rumors to bed." So there's a lot of different parts that we addressed and that we thought were kind of topics that people were asking, questions people have been asking over the years.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really good interview, and it was kind of right before the Starkey Gala,
Right. Yep.
where they announced, the new wave of innovation that they've been working on. And I had Dave Copperthorne on
Yeah.
right after that event where he attended it, and we talked all about it. But I do think it's just worth reiterating that you have these hearing aid companies like a Starkey that are
Hmm.
really doing some interesting things with this idea of
Definitely.
this transition into a hearing aid looking more and more like a computer in your ear, and
Yes.
what kind of doors does that open up? And so, to your point, I think that you are going to see sort of a bifurcation of the market where you have these premium high-end offerings that I think will appeal to a certain subset of folks with hearing loss, and they'll have an increasing amount of really cool features. I think over time, a lot of those features will then move, they'll cascade back down to these more mild to moderate offerings that I think we're going to see some pretty good options. And,
Yeah.
it might be in the OTC realm, but it might also be more of just entry level technology that the professionals are going to be dispensing. In my eyes, the
Hmm.
way I look at it is it's truly a rising tide lifts all ships. I mean, I think
Yes.
everything is getting better, which is ultimately going to benefit the patients. I would imagine that the patient satisfaction rate over the past 5 years with the technology itself has like seen exponential improvements, because it really has. We're at a point now where these really small devices, and you're seeing it with companies like Apple, like their
Yes.
engineering prowess is really coming in with like AirPods and stuff like that. We're finally at a point in today's day and age where super small devices like hearing aids can be innovated on in some really really exciting ways that weren't really available that long ago. So I think a lot of the like core functionality, being able to make sure that these things provide the best situational and like speech and noise, the best kind of listening
Right.
experience. But now that that's all sort of like being established and accomplished, it's going to be really exciting to see where things go from there.
Exactly. Well, and to talk about Starkey, I mean, they've really positioned themselves very, very well in terms of kind of being at the forefront of integrating AI and sensor technology, which I think
Mhm.
those two areas over the next 5 years are really going to be taking off in hearing devices. And I think you've commented before. I think you've probably had I think you had the valence cell guys
Hmm.
on before as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
Rand Curdle.
the sensor technology, I think we're just on the cusp of that. I
It's
think
going to be so cool.
that's going to be blown up. And the, from the professional side, I mean, as an audiologist, what that can mean is that we're going to be more actively involved in, potentially more actively involved in coordinating things with primary care and maybe some other specialists, whether that's cardiology or whether that's, just, a number of other specialties
Yeah.
that might come into play that we're not even talking about yet.
Well,
Um,
so
it's just very interesting.
one thing I want to mention, right before we recorded the conversation, you sent me the survey that you guys just conducted. It was like 225 audiologists. And
Yes.
one of the things that really caught my attention, I'm looking at it right now, the top referral source for new patients, according to the survey respondents,
Yes.
almost 60% said it was doctor or medical referrals. So to
That's
your
correct.
point, this is something that I've been really trying to like hammer home is that if these things become like truly preventative health tools, where the way
Exactly.
I envision it is if you have diabetes or you have hypertension, you have like any list of what these types of sensors are starting to be able to monitor. Um, and you go to your doctor and they say you need to wear some sort of monitor to actively
Mhm.
monitor this, okay? And they're going to give you a list of options that might include a Fitbit, an Apple Watch, and then they might say, you know what, you might be predisposed to some hearing loss. Let's get you tested. A
Exactly.
hearing aid might be a really good option for you now because those things can be worn all day. And so again, we're at the very, very, very beginning of this, but like as the trajectory goes, in 5 years, we might really see the hearing aid be one of the most popular tools that people use to constantly monitor these types
Mhm.
of, like things that the sensors can gauge. So
Absolutely.
I'm right there with you, and I think that is sort of the Starkey. I think that's their vision here. I'm going to be really curious to see if other manufacturers follow suit with embedding the type of PPG sensors that balance cell manufacturers that are small enough now, as of
I
like
think,
2 years
yeah,
ago, they're now small enough to embed onto a
correct.
hearing aid. So that really is like the bleeding edge of
Well, and
where I think this is going.
just even before we saw some of the blood pressure sensors and stuff that have been unveiled here in the last few months, I mean, the fall detection. Now, granted, that's an Apple Watches, but I mean, that's we're talking about in the hearing aid industry. While not all of our patients are elderly, a lot of them are,
Hmm.
and I mean, there's also, I mean, there's just, I mean, almost an unlimited number of things you can imagine where that could really benefit somebody. If we can, if the hearing aid detected a fall and they could send a text message to the person's child or a caregiver,
Yes.
that's a big deal. So, I mean, they're like you said, we're on the bleeding edge here, but I think you know, while there's a lot of quote disruptions happening, those are some really great ones that are going to be very beneficial, I think, in the
Well,
future.
it like it literally it changes the value proposition of these devices. It
Exactly.
adds secondary use cases that are really compelling. So just to your point, you think about the patient journey to buying a hearing aid takes about 7 years, right? Like that's what people quote
Hmm.
as the average sales cycle. Now, if you can, the goal here for a professional is how do you reduce that? How do you make it so that people adopt these things earlier? And so you say, okay, well, today's value proposition, I say, well, this is going to allow for you to live a better life because you'll be able to hear better. Okay, compelling, but maybe that's not going to push me over the edge. Now, if I have a caregiver in the room with you and I say it's going to be able to help you live a better life because you're going to be able to hear better. And oh, by the way, you caregiver, this is going to also add a level of reassurance to you that you're going to have this notification system built into the device that's going to be
Yep.
detecting falls. It's going to be alerting you to the data that's being found, within the device to say the person's not getting out of the house. So again, I think what's so exciting about if I were a professional right now, I would be giddy with the prospect of the fact that what you're selling today is about to be dramatically more compelling, in my opinion, in
Exactly.
terms of
Well,
not only the person wearing it, but the stakeholders too.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, and to your point, so our survey, and it's consistent with some earlier surveys we've done a couple of years ago, um, medical referrals being a huge source as far as new patients coming in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a double-edged sword, and it has been in the past, is that you'll get a referral, and that's one of if a doctor tells, more often than not, as far as acceptance of people getting hearing aids, when their doctor tells them
Yes.
you need a hearing aid, the odds of them getting them are much, much higher. But on the flip side of that, if the doctor says, oh, well, your hearing problem's not that bad, you don't need
Mm-hmm.
one, the odds of them getting a hearing aid are dramatically lower. So if we had other compelling reasons, I mean, even just from a standpoint of us being able to dialogue with the medical community on the
Yes.
importance of hearing health, if we're able to say, oh, yeah, well, it definitely helps people hear, which, all these studies coming out of Johns Hopkins and all these other really respected institutions that are showing the negativity of having untreated hearing loss and all
Yep.
the health benefits of treating hearing loss. If we can then have these other use cases like monitoring for falls and all these other health conditions, I mean, like you said, that's incredibly compelling for any medical doctor or other health professional.
Totally agree with you, Kevin. So let's move on to the second interview that you did. David Cannington, New Hera. David's everywhere now. I just heard him on the Voice Spot podcast yesterday. He's really making waves right now, but I really enjoyed that one. So give me some
Yeah.
takeaways from that.
Well, I've been saying it for a while. I've been extremely impressed with New Hera's ability, their staying power, and how well they've positioned their branding in both sides. They've been able to kind of walk the fine line of appealing to not just the consumer side, but they've done a pretty good job, communicating with the professional community as well. And they have a lot of really unique aspects, like utilization of the NL2 fitting formula, which the average person listening to this podcast has no idea what that is. But those of us in the hearing aid industry know that's the most common algorithm used for fitting hearing aids to people with hearing loss. So they have a partnership with the National Acoustics Lab, which is really respected in audiology, to integrate that into their devices. And not only that, they have a great app, and they've done a really great job of maintaining their staying power in the industry while all these other companies have fallen by the wayside, or like Bragi, for instance, who was a pioneer as well, ended up getting out of the hardware altogether. They're still on the software side, but there's New Hera has done a really, really good job of kind of appealing to that consumer segment, and he's indicated that the younger age group has been one of their major drivers or major users, and that's like the segment that has been very hard to get into hearing aids. So like if you get people in these hearable devices and they realize there's some benefit, but maybe they're not getting quite enough benefit, or maybe they realize they have a problem, that might get people in the door sooner. So I think while the OTC and hearable side, some professionals get a little leery about it, I think it's actually going to be fairly beneficial for us.
And the other thing too to point out, I think, with like hearables and these non-traditional offerings, is that just like I was saying earlier, like in this day, this time that we live in today, we're sort of at a new defining moment where these devices are getting really good. And so I think that first generation devices should not be emblematic of like the technology in today's terms, because even 2 years difference from generation 1 to, I believe New Hera is on like generation 3.
Yeah, they're on their third.
It's night and day, and it's going to continue that way. And so I agree with you. I think that I really appreciate that New Hera has, they're at all the trade shows. They come in and they're not coming in from the standpoint of we're not trying to steal customers. We're not trying to poach patients away. We're trying to introduce people to this technology through a different offering, and hopefully at a different age, at an earlier age. And I think that what's going to be interesting to watch unfold is that, I've been saying this, I said it with Mark Trung, who I just had on, where we talk about this concept of hearing aid genius bars. And I think that what will be really interesting is the practices that adopt the mentality of come on in, and I'm going to be an expert to match you with the best thing that's possible for you. And I'm going to present you with options. And I think what's cool about Nuheara is that they provide you with another arrow in your quiver, right? Like you might say to someone, okay, so here's 4 different hearing aids. Now, your loss is currently at a moderate level, and or it's maybe even like not even at a moderate level, it's more at a mild level. And so if you don't really want to adopt something that has the type of price point or the form factor as a hearing aid because of the connectivity that you have with that, maybe this is a better option for you. And so the beauty of that, though, is that you still establish the patient relationship. You still have all of that person's information so that you maintain a dialogue with them to say, okay, it's been 3 more years. Are you still happy with this? Or do you want to graduate into something new?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And we have, we have a pretty large professional audience with Hearing Health Matters, and there's people that have really strong opinions on both sides of the equation, but more and more in my conversations with colleagues and just like in the surveys we've done, the anxiety and the hesitation that a lot of people held in the beginning, the early days of this stuff, it's shifted a lot, and I think people are a lot more inclined to be open-minded, as and I'll tell you, just in my personal experience, I've seen, I've had patients come into the clinic, and I can think of probably 5 or 6 different occasions. They came in, they bought a device online, they realized they got benefit, but they realized it wasn't enough, and they needed to come in, have a real exam, and get hearing aids. And so really at the end of the day, rather than be detrimental to the industry as a whole, I think it's probably going to be a big driver for getting people in the door. Earlier. Hopefully, that's the idea. Is I think we're going to see them even earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the podcast that I listened to yesterday with David, he said the average age now for their patients, are their users is like, I think he said 55. So they definitely are targeting a younger demographic, and I think that's a good thing. So the third one, this one was really interesting. The pharmacy company, the therapeutics company. Could you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah. So I've been following these guys. So what's also really interesting, just to give some background to your reader or your listeners here, is the pharmacy and biotech field. It's not on everybody's radar, but there's been a big surge in, I mean, tens of millions of dollars being invested in the hearing space.
Really interesting.
And one of the most promising ones that I've been following is this company called Frequency Therapeutics. And I had a chance to connect with Dr. Carl LaBelle, and he's the chief development officer. He's like the guy that's helping develop what's called FX322, and it's been shown in studies to basically regenerate hair cells in the inner ear, restore hearing. They've had a doubling of word discrimination ability in testing. They've seen improvements in hearing. So I mean, we're talking about treating hearing loss that's supposed to be permanent.
Wow.
So we're not talking, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, but I mean, it sounds like whether it's Frequency or some of these other companies, I mean, we legitimately may see 1, 2, maybe even more companies coming out with actual FDA approved treatments for permanent hearing loss. So, we get so lost in the technology, which is something that I love, but it's like, that is a type of technology that, I mean, it is just mind blowing to me that we maybe in a decade could be to the point where somebody could go to the ENT office after they were diagnosed with hearing loss, get an injection, and you could restore their hearing. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that would be unbelievable.
And Frequency has been, they just had an IPO this fall, and they just raised an additional $80 million or more, I think, off their IPO. And so they're able to continue funding, and they're in a 2A clinical trial right now, I think, with people. So it's a human trial.
Is the company, is this their only product, or are they doing all kinds of different things?
No, the type of technology they have, it's, I can't do it justice here on the podcast. You have to check out their site. But it's called progenitor cell activation, and they're looking at other other diseases and other parts of the body where they could regenerate cells that
Wow.
essentially uses the same formula. But FX322 is their big one, and that's the hearing loss drug compound, I guess you can call it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I read a lot of science fiction, and it certainly seems as if in a lot of the futures that I read about, there's
Yeah,
the ability to regrow limbs and
yeah,
regrow all kinds of
yeah.
different
I
things.
mean,
So
those could all be
it's
things here in the next.
science fiction tends to kind of become science fact.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a I mean, just the fact that that's potentially an option on the horizon is, for a lot of people, is just pretty mind blowing. Really
Yeah.
is.
So the last thing I really want to talk about with you, I definitely need to bring you on again because there's so many different things I want to talk about. But for today, there's one thing that I want to talk about that I think is flying under the radar, but it's really important to point out,
Hmm.
and that is the fact that this industry is really starting to abide by the premise of data is the new oil. And what I mean by that is, let me back up a step. So again, I was looking at your survey, and there are two really clear things, and that's in the data within the survey. One is that rechargeable hearing aids are growing like crazy. These
Really.
are being adopted at a very wide scale. And then the other one is that, not lagging far behind, is that smartphone connectivity is becoming a increasingly more important aspect to the devices.
Yes.
And what I think is so interesting about this shift to Bluetooth hearing aids and all of the app-based, from every hearing aid, you have the companion app that goes along with it. You see the same thing with Nuhera, and the apps that accompanies with that. What I don't think a lot of people are recognizing, or maybe they're just at least not vocalizing, is that the manufacturers of the devices now have so much more insight
Hmm.
into the demographics of who's wearing their devices. They have a whole
Yeah.
lot more insight into the usage data. And I think that I think that this is ultimately going to really benefit. It's going to benefit the consumer, but I think it has ability to really benefit the providers too, because
Yes.
everybody's becoming way more intelligent about who's wearing hearing aids, where are the pitfalls, and like the different usability stats. I think are going to really glean some interesting insight.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. This is another area I think is like you said, probably doesn't get enough discussion because connectivity. I will tell you just a personal story that back before I had graduated, I went to an audiology conference and I got to demo what was at the time an Oticon Epoch. I think it was probably like 2007. So it's been a while, but it was the first Bluetooth hearing aid and had a Bluetooth streamer. And so I tested it out at this conference and I listened to the music streaming. And I said, "Oh, this is pretty cool, but who's really going to be using this? Like, this is going to be so few people." And now fast forward now, like when somebody's app stops working, when there's a phone update, people get angry. I mean, we've
Hmm.
gotten to the point where it's like, oh, that's kind of a cool thing. And to the point where now it's like, if this doesn't work 100% of the time, I'm going to be really PO'd and I'm going to come, I'm going to get mad
Yeah.
and I need you to fix it. Because people, the rate of technology adoption from a clinician side, we see it with consumers, the uptake of Bluetooth. It took a little while, but then it really started taking off. But apps seems to have taken off even faster. So the Bluetooth part's been around longer than the apps, but the
Hmm.
apps, the apps have gotten really, really good the last couple of years in my experience, and to the point where the ones that have done a really good job, they're intuitive enough that they're advanced enough for somebody that's pretty tech savvy, but yet they're intuitive enough that somebody that's in their 80s can still manage and work the apps to adjust their devices too. So it's definitely something that's been pretty phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, the data that these companies are going to be able to glean, and then hopefully they'll share some of that data with us so that we can learn a little bit about some behavior that maybe will be surprising. Because this will also help manufacturers improve their algorithms too. So not even just the user interface and all that, but it'll help them improve the noise algorithms. It'll help them with amplification algorithms, because if they're consistently finding people are making certain changes in certain
Yes.
environments, the hearing aids are monitoring. I mean, if they can start gleaning that data, that will certainly improve, and it'll just help satisfaction go up. So I think that definitely is a really interesting area.
Right. Like I think that this is sort of this is the thing that isn't really, I think, top of mind, is that if, prior to these app-based hearing aids and different hearables,
Hmm.
you sort of fit that person, maybe you got some demographic information from them in the fitting process, and then you send them on their way. And really your only basis of how is this thing performing, the only basis that you go off of is what they're telling you. And so now you can actually see the data and you then apply that at scale, so that you have these companies that have thousands and thousands of people out in the field using these things. You can start to detect patterns. And I think,
Hmm.
like, as machine learning becomes more and more sophisticated, you can layer on the machine learning algorithms to detect things, just like you're saying, so that, this is how I think, like, you're already seeing with Phonak, they have, AutoSense, and I believe Widex has something too. So
Yeah,
these machine learning algorithms that are sort of like they're the underlying piece, that's driving the automatic configurations of devices and the automatic programming and stuff like that. This is all going to get better and better and better as time goes
absolutely. Well, and we've already, I mean, if I understand it correctly, I think, like to your point, Widex and some of the other companies have already done updates to their apps as a result of some of the data.
on.
So, I mean, and I think to your point, we'll see that more and more. As time goes on, it will just get better and better. And then as like you said, when you start putting machine learning into the picture and be able to really chew and process all that data, that'll really glean some really interesting insights into behaviors and improvements. I think it's going to definitely be a good, pretty fascinating area to watch.
Well, and I think the other thing too that will be interesting to see will be how the manufacturers, how open they are with this data, particularly around, I can almost imagine networks forming around these things. So if I'm a Starkey, if I dispense their hearing aids, I'm privy to the Starkey network. And this would apply to everything, Widex, Signia, whoever. And so you have the insight into, here's like my patient's data.
Yeah.
And then also what that could then lead to is this idea, okay, with OTC, we know that there's been a lot of research that's gone in to say that the overall, the patient's quality of their experience tends to be higher if there is a provider that's involved. So if the manufacturers want to really involve the providers, this could be a really effective lead gen tool too. Ways that you can identify, okay, so here are all of the the people that are wearing the OTC devices, for our products, and we want to funnel them toward providers in time. So here are some really hot leads of, like, okay, this person's been wearing an OTC device for 2 years, and so you get this insight. And then
Yep.
again, I just look at it from like a consumer acquisition standpoint of, this could be a really good way to drive that. And it will be interesting to see if the manufacturers position the data in such a way to really drive people toward providers, where they know that, as you progress into higher levels of the technology, having that hands-on experience with a provider, it matters more and more as the severity goes up.
And it does. And I mean, and I can just tell you my own personal experience because, like I mentioned before, seeing all these people that have bought these amplifiers, over the
Yeah.
internet or off TV. And I mean, and then they come in and then you get a chance to really sit down, explain their hearing results and what's going to work best. And I mean, and then they do great. But yet
Hmm.
they were struggling with that device. So, I mean, there's a time and a place for some of these starter devices, but the data is very, very clear that having a professional is definitely going to be, the what makes the difference. But to your point, I think it'd be wise for the manufacturers to either partner with
Hmm.
some of these OTC manufacturers, whether it's like a New Hera or some of these other companies out there, that, like you said, maybe like after so many months of use, or if it notices certain triggers, that it will pop up and say, hey, you should consider getting a professional hearing exam and talking to and having a consultation or
Hmm.
something, and kind of driving that. That point. So whether the manufacturers are going to see this and they're going to want to start buying up these companies, that's certainly something that we're going to
Yep.
watch. But remains to be seen. A lot of them are kind of keeping their distance because they're just kind of watching. But I think that may be the direction we're going. And I think as far as patient care is concerned, I think at the end of the day, as an audiologist, we definitely would like to see that. It's just like if somebody buys a pair of reading glasses, if there was some way to trigger them, say, hey, maybe you should go have an eye exam.
Right.
Optometrists love that, but I mean, the principle is there, and I think the technology is certainly there. And I just think there's just a lot of really interesting and fascinating things to kind of watch over the next few years.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think we're for somebody like me that's like really interested of the technology side. It's just getting more and more interesting. I think that
Yeah.
I'm excited to just really watch this all unfold. It feels just like there's more and more momentum. I think
Mhm.
some of that's fueled by just what's happening on the consumer side. I mean, it can't be reiterated enough. Like what's happening with AirPods is truly a phenomenon at this point,
Oh my gosh.
and
Yeah.
it's driving people to make them aware. Like this is kind of cool having something in my ear for longer periods of time. And I think that we're going to see more and more um, media that's designed specifically for these things. We're going to see more functionality, more apps, all kinds of things. And the beauty of all of that is that all that stuff that's largely being driven by the consumer market, we're going to be the beneficiary of it too,
Eating
because
over already. Yeah.
exactly.
And I mean, and when Apple integrated their decibel meter, I mean, we've already even
Watch it.
seen people come in because they got a trigger that said that they were being exposed to loud noise. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, and when you start getting these big tech companies involved, like an Apple, I mean, that's only going to help because it's just driving awareness to a very
Totally
large
agree.
segment of the world, frankly, that maybe is just not on the radar. I mean, as much as we wish that everybody paid attention to their hearing health, we know that the reality is very few people it's on their radar. So so that I think the more we can get those companies involved and doing the right thing, hopefully, is just going to help everybody.
Could not agree more with you, Kevin. So share with everybody, where can we find the column, and where can we follow you
Yeah.
and
So
everything you guys are doing?
absolutely. So I appreciate that. So it's hearinghealthmatters.org. So hearinghealthmatters.org, and the column, it's called Hearing Healthcare 2020. And it's going to be it's going to be at least monthly, and it's in the Innovations in Hearing blog. So we have several blogs, several different editors on our site, and we do news, we do opinion pieces on our site. So it's kind of covers a lot of different aspects of the hearing industry in general. But the Innovations in Hearing is the blog, and the column is Hearing Healthcare 2020.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for everybody who tuned in and stayed here till the end. We will chat with you next time.
All
Cheers.
right. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.